David, let's talk about, as we finish the last segment, let's talk about free will for a minute and the nature of free will. You talked about creative design. We've talked about the clockmaker conversation. What happens if, the clockmaker, if this is or is not. But the nature of free will, which is part of our traditions, is such an important part of our traditions.
How do you understand free will as it applies to God's sovereignty?
So we go from the clockmaker, swing the pendulum all the way over to complete, God giving us complete free will. Would you talk about those dynamics there? Okay.
It's a very good question, and you pose it in a way that is a really important thing for us to understand, and that is that theology often swings from one extreme to the other. And so when people talk about freedom, and I'll come back to free will in a moment, but they talk about freedom, they either mean complete freedom or no freedom at all.
Yes.
Whereas most of our experiences are of what we might call limited freedom. Now, I have freedom at one level to run the 100 meters in 9.5 seconds. It's never going to happen. You can tell by looking at me.
Me either.
There are certain constraints that inhibit an exercise of freedom. I can still decide to do it, and with a certain amount of training and a suspension of age, and no doubt probably lots of help in putting a train under me or something like that, I can do it. But be careful of saying it's either one or the other. So the question then is, what is the nature of freedom within certain structures which inhibit that freedom, or structures that liberate that freedom? And it seems to me self-evident that we are beings of free will. I know the huge philosophical debate and baggage, which will see philosophers listening to this and going, oh no. But it just seems to me obvious that we have free will. We make those decisions. And within the Wesleyan theological tradition, the concept of free will is very important.
Yes.
But remember, Wesley had a sense that free will was gift, rather than something that we exercise purely by ourselves. So Wesley's understanding of prevenient grace was that the Spirit goes ahead of us to make the choice for good possible. That is, if we then make the choice for good, to God be the glory. If we make the choice for bad, then it's our own responsibility completely. So Wesleyan understanding does stress free will. The question then is, does creation itself have a degree of freedom or unpredictability? And one or two of the insights that we've been gaining about the natural world in terms of the unpredictability of quantum systems or chaotic systems seem to indicate, or at least raise the possibility, that the physical process itself is not completely determined, is not completely predictable, that there is an openness to the future within the physical systems. Now, free will for human beings has often been used as a defense or an understanding of where evil comes from in human interaction.
Yes.
People can choose to abuse the gift of free will, which leads to evil. Might there be a sense in which the openness of the physical material universe, which gives flourishing and beauty, might there be a consequence of that gift of freedom to the physical universe, which sometimes is for ill?
Yes.
So, for instance, the movement of tectonic plates on the Earth, we know causes earthquakes.
Yes.
We also know is essential to provide agricultural soil.
Yes.
Might there be a way of understanding that there is a degree of freedom to the physical process? If humans have a degree of freedom, if the creation has a degree of freedom, then let's not rule out that God has a degree of freedom. that God can work
Fascinating.
in free acts. So that we now have 3 degrees of freedom going on in interaction with each other. Our freedom, the freedom of the natural world, and God's freedom. And we know that in interaction, things begin to fall out, which are really very helpful.
You mean the interaction of those 3 wills?
Those 3. So we know, for example, that earthquake faults are fine in themselves if you invest money in building buildings that won't fall down.
Yes.
But if you don't put in enough investment, and those who can't afford good buildings find themselves on earthquake faults, then it's the vulnerable who then suffer.
Yes.
And so the interaction of human decisions, free will, with this freedom in the physical world may be some of the reasons why this world leads to some of these awful consequences. And God's freedom then is a question about how does God exercise freedom in both intervening and yet not intervening.
Yes.
And there's a tension there. So I love Luke 15, the 3 parables.
Oh, yes.
Lost sheep, lost coin, and the prodigal son. The first 2 parables are really interesting because they're about a person who exercises agency, who goes after the lost sheep and the lost coin, a God who seeks to restore. But the prodigal son, I often think, is really interesting because the father doesn't go off into the far country. He allows the prodigal. He gives space. Now, those of us who are parents will know finding the freedom to both intervene and to stay back.
Yes, very difficult.
Very difficult. So we've got this sense of how does God exercise freedom in answer to prayer, in miracle. What I don't want to do is take away God's freedom by saying God can't interact at all, or we have no freedom at all. Maybe that there's an interaction of these 3 degrees of freedom at which prayer itself is crucial. Now, don't get me wrong. This isn't an answer to the problem of evil.
I understand.
The problem of evil is one of those questions that I don't have an answer to. Why, Lord, not just allow evil, but the scale of evil that we see in the world? Lord, why? And that's one of those unanswered questions that I have. I live with that unanswered question because of Jesus. You see, what I see in Jesus is, first of all, a God who shares in the suffering, doesn't stand far apart. And secondly, a God who promises through that suffering that love will always triumph. Now, I don't know how that will happen. And I don't know how God's heart is deeply broken by the suffering that breaks our hearts as we look at this world. I think the problem of evil is not a problem where there's a philosophical easy answer. The problem of evil is a challenge for all of us to use our freedom to make the world a better place.
And so I'll end it with this question. So this nature of why do good things happen to bad people, or why do bad things happen to good people, there is a give and take that happens. I have encountered it in my ministry more for when people who die young or have gone through terrible diseases, someone will say, well, this was just God's will. And I personally, with my own health, don't believe God intended to cause that, but it is the natural response to a broken world, a physical world, and so forth. I do believe in that. What would you say to the person then in terms of God choosing to not intervene versus intervene when it comes to personal situations like that?
I'd want to say I don't know. And I'd want to be quite clear about that.
Yeah.
I think the worst thing that we can do is to try and give an explanation where there is no explanation.
Yes.
I think the difficulty is that often as pastors, as leaders, we feel we have to fill the silence
Yes.
with some kind of explanation. And what theology actually often helps you to do, theology sometimes tells you not what to say, it tells you what not to say. So your theological understanding guards you from giving too simplistic or unbiblical view on some of these things. The Bible itself is full of some of these unanswered questions. When Jesus hears that his friend Lazarus is ill,
Why does he wait?
why does he wait?
Yeah. Yeah.
Come on, Lord.
Absolutely.
And Mary and Martha, when Jesus eventually
It's the first question they
arrives.
ask
That's
him.
right. That's right. Martha asks the theological question. Mary
It's emotional.
is emotional.
Yes.
Both are valid responses to this situation. And why in Mark's Gospel, in Mark chapter 2, and chapter 1 and chapter 2, does it seem that Jesus doesn't heal everyone? It says he heals many, but not everyone. Lord, what? I mean, and then in 1 Corinthians, why Paul's thorn in the flesh, even though he prays for it a number of times, is not removed? Why? I mean, Paul the apostle, surely. But there are some things where I think there's a bigger narrative of which we simply can't fully understand.
It's our finite being versus an infinite.
It's our finite being. It may also be just the complexity of a broken world.